Welcome and thank you all for joining today's Regional Issues Forum. Please note that today's call is being recorded, and currently all of our virtual attendees are in a listen-only mode to minimize background noise. There will be opportunity for Q&A in today's call, and we will make sure to give you all instructions on how to ask a question at that time. With that, I'd now like to formally begin today's call and turn it over to RIF Chair Allie Mace. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us here. We're very excited to be here for the Regional Issues Forum meeting today, and very excited to have so many people here with us, joining us both on the phone and in person. Just before we get started, one quick safety-related announcement. If there is an emergency, there are exits both to the left of the door and to the right, and you follow the exit signs out. Let's go ahead. So we're going to get things kicked off. Let's start by pulling up the agenda. I'll do a quick review on the next slide of what we're going to cover today. So you can go to the next slide, Silas. All right. So here we are. We're getting started here. We're at around 1 o'clock here. We have a few opening remarks and announcements, and then we will turn it to our Western Energy Markets governing body leadership for opening remarks. We have both Chair Rob Panzioka and Vice Chair and RIF Liaison Rebecca Wagner with us. After that, we are going to head into our market scenes panel. Our esteemed panelists are already sitting up here next to me. We have an hour and a half for that, and we'll cover the format for that when we get there. We will have a 10-minute break after that time. And then we have a number of updates. We have a WEM implementation update, an update on our RIF enhancements, which we talked about back in April in our meeting, as well as an update on day-ahead market enhancements implementation. And then we'll wrap up, aim to wrap up right around 4:30. And as Sienna mentioned, we are having a reception and hope that everyone can join us for that. So let's go to the next slide. And I will welcome Rob Panzioka up to the podium to provide some opening remarks as the governing body chair.
Thank you, Allie. Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to provide a few remarks to get the meeting started. I'd like to start off with recognizing the governing body members that are here and the Board of Governor members that are here. My notes reflect that all of the governing body members are present, but John apparently has travel problems or issues, and he's not here yet. But we do have, as you will hear after me, Rebecca Wagner, we have Anita, and we have Andy Campbell. Behind them, we have two Board of Governors. We have Jan Shorey, and we have Joe Edo. And just so you know, both Jan and Joe have been terrific partners with us as we do outreach. And this is not their first RIF meeting or meeting with us. So they have a great interest in know what's going on and be hearing from you. I'd like to touch on about three things. First, my appreciation for RIF and their comments and priorities. I think that over the last year and a half, we have seen a lot of input from RIF in shaping where the priorities are. And the question is, does it make a difference? And I want to assure you that it does. Now, again, I'm not staff, and but I can assure you that we ask staff the input that we receive from you, and we want to make certain that we are comfortable that they're hearing what we're hearing, and that the direction that is being provided is shaped by RIF. And I don't know, I didn't see Amelia here. By any chance, is Amelia here?
She's on vacation.
Oh, okay, she's on vacation. But if she was here, she would let you know that one of the first and always questions I have for her is on those minority opinions, and what were the responses, and did they get an explanation as to how that input was incorporated. And I think she's done a terrific job, as all of the staff has done. And I just hope that RIF continues to keep that momentum and maintain that focus on providing input. And I know it's hard. It takes a lot of resources, but it's valuable. The other thing I would like to touch on and briefly, and hopefully this leads into the first panel a little bit, is on SEAMS. SEAMS has an interesting history in the Western interconnection. And, sometimes it's a good word, sometimes it's not a good word. And I just want to hearken back to those of you who might remember this. There was a group called the SEAMS Steering Group Western Interconnection, or SIGWI. Some of you might remember that. And that was something that was started in the early 2000s. And what we probably were most known for is the work that we did after EPAC 2005, when there was the but a mandate by Congress on DOE to put congestion studies for the US together, identify bottlenecks, and use that bottleneck studies for the designation or potential designation of national interest electric transmission corridor. DOE retained consultants to do the work for the Eastern interconnection, and DOE retained SIGWI to do the work for the Western interconnection. And there was some interesting outcomes, but ultimately that work was incorporated into their report. And at that time, we didn't have economic models. We didn't have economic data to look at. And so congestion was defined by utilization. And we did a lot of work. There were a lot of people involved in this, by the way, using U100, in other words, 100% utilization, the U90, 90% utilization, and U75, 75% utilization. We could go on, were those really good metrics or not. At the time, it made a lot of sense, and we thought we did really good work. And today's, looking backwards, maybe not such great work. And at the time, there wasn't anything better to go on. And what I would like to leave for you is that there's probably more going on with SEAMS. And of course, there's BA to BA SEAMS work that has always gone on. Ultimately, there's going to be market to market SEAMS that go on. I had brought up with the Board of Governors at my update to them last month that SEAMS is a horizon issue. There are some things that absolutely have to happen, which is EDAM. If we don't keep EDAM on track, if that's not our highest priority, we won't need to worry about SEAMS. So that has to be ultimately the highest priority. But for RIF, when thinking about congestion, what should that look like? And I think there's a place for RIF to be helping to shape, to lead, to form what that is, and hopefully come up with something much better, and hopefully have it more market-based and more optimization-based. So with that, Allie, that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll now welcome Rebecca Wagner, who's the governing body vice chair and our RIF liaison for the past year. And I just want to also thank Member Wagner for her leadership and support as the RIF liaison over the last year. It's been wonderful work.
Yikes. Thanks, Allie. Welcome to Reno. You're in my hometown, so happy to have you all here. We ordered perfect weather for you. A little hot in the afternoon, nice and cool in the evening. And if you can get out, go for a walk in the morning, it's outstanding. This is one of my favorite times of the year until it gets too hot. But enjoy. And also, we're a tourism economy. We love having you here. Go spend money. Thanks for allowing me to give a few comments. First, I wanted to echo your comments. I've really enjoyed being the RIF liaison for this last year. I've learned a lot about the RIF. The folks got to know the folks within the RIF, and also the work that they're doing, and really have seen an evolution of the RIF from the time we first concocted this when we were working on the transitional committee to see where it is now. And it's exciting. I'm spending time reading the materials, and the topics that you're bringing forward are relevant and helpful in our decision making. And that's really what we were striving to achieve, is having this channel to stakeholders to bring forward ideas raise issues and help keep us informed and educated. And on that note, I don't want to echo too much of what Rob said, but the SEAMS issue clearly is a hot topic, whether you think we should be talking about it now or talking about it later. We have to focus on it at some point, and the more education that we can get through these forums is really, really helpful to us. But I do agree with Rob 100% is that implementation of EDAM, hopefully as smoothly as possible, is the highest priority and of greatest importance, at least to me and probably to my colleagues on the governing body and the Board of Governors. And finally, I just want to acknowledge the stakeholders. We've kind of put you through the ringer. There has been so much going on as I go through and read comments. And I think it's a lot like being on the commission, is reading comments, trying to process them, gather them in context. But the stakeholder process and your feedback has been immensely helpful and really helps us like fine tune and understand and get the perspectives. So thank you for all the work that you've been doing. I know it's a lot, and attending meetings is a lot, and the working groups and all the different iterations of every initiative, but it matters and it helps a ton. So we appreciate it. And I'm going to stop there. Again, welcome to Reno. Enjoy, spend money, and see you at the reception.
Wonderful, thank you. So with that, we are going to get started on our first panel for our meeting this afternoon. So as we've already tipped off the mention of market SEAMS, our first panel is a market SEAMS panel. I'm going to start introducing the panel in the voice of Vijay Satyal, who is our public interest organization liaison and was not able to be here today. He is on the phone, but we weren't sure about his connection. So this is Vijay reading. That when I refer to myself in the third person, that's when I'm very clear. So I'm going to read his intro and then we'll get started. The RIC welcomes you all to this second session in a series panel on managing SEAMS that builds on the April 9th session with a hands-on perspective from the ISO as a market operator and 3 utilities, Portland General Electric, PNM, and Idaho Power. My RIC colleague, Chair Allison, and I are grateful to the panelists for their willingness to speak to SEAMS in light of emerging day ahead and RTO market structures. I regret not being there in person as I'm halfway through a bag-packing 7-week sabbatical in which I've seen many SEAMS-like travel agreements between competitiveness tour operators to cost share load, humans and non-human cargo, and honoring existing rules for shipping lanes in Italian canals or travel times through canyons or lakes in Scotland. Couldn't help but wonder the same about our electric system, with transmission-owning utilities, BAs and LSEs managing various reliability obligations and cost share commitments for economic dispatch. Hope our esteemed panelists can shed light on what's working well, what's missing, and what worries them the most as we enter a critical time in the West. So that's a welcome from Vijay. I can say I have been thoroughly jealous as I hear about his travels through Europe. So our panel, I'll introduce our panelists in just a moment.
Thank you, Allison.
Let you know the structure. So we are going to have about 10 minutes of brief presentations from each of our panelists. We then we'll spend about 20 minutes doing kind of moderated Q&A from questions that Vijay and I have prepared. And then we'll have at least 20 minutes available for audience Q&A as well. When we get to that, we will have the microphone out and run that around, because without the microphones, folks on the phone can't hear. We will also, of course, have an opportunity for folks on the WebEx to chime in and ask questions as well. So with that, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists before we jump into their presentation. So to my right, we have Mark Rothleader, the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the California ISO. Kathy Anderson, Senior Manager of Transmission and Markets at Idaho Power. Kelsey Martinez, Chief of Staff, Office of the President and Director of Regional Markets and Transmission Strategy. And Pam Sporborg, Director of Transmission and Markets at Portland General Electric. And I was very impressed when I grabbed all of your titles with how similar the 3 of your titles are. You don't usually find that much similarity. So it's the right people here. Kelsey's is longer, it's true. She has sort of 2 titles. I was impressed. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Mark to provide his introductory remarks.
Ali, thank you for, well, thanks Rick for continuing the discussion on seams. It's a timely topic to discuss, and it's an important one. Unfortunately, the shortness of the name word doesn't do it justice in terms of the broad spectrum that is really covered by seams. And I think that's part of the challenge is what seams are, which ones are ripe for discussion and resolution, and which ones should be time boxed for a later point, just because you're staging this in terms of, again, prioritizing things like EDAM getting up and running. Where does the seam exist? What is the seam and what needs to be addressed? You can go to the next slide. So just in terms of some of the principles that kind of go across all the seams discussions and consideration, I think we've developed some areas where these principles I think are common to, regardless of the seam, where it is, what it is. I think we should keep our eyes on the ball. I'm not saying these are comprehensive principles, but I think these are working principles that help guide us in terms of consideration of not that one. Next slide.
Yeah.
Oh,
There we go. Yeah.
okay. So yeah, so these are the principles, and again, I'm not suggesting these are comprehensive, but I think these are guiding. Obviously, job one, maintain reliability and security of the system. So as you navigate the seams, how do you do that in a reliable way? How do you do that consideration of security of the system? And but I must say that coming into this discussion with the perspective that the best approach is, if you don't have a seam, don't create one. If you have one, how do you minimize and navigate? So the next principle is maintaining that non-discriminatory access to the system. And that should always be kind of a guiding principle. But it may conflict with some of the other principles, and we'll see how that plays out later on, because we do have to, and jumping to the respect existing rights and adjacent operating agreements, you have to operate and be cognizant of those agreements, of those transmission rights, and they may not always be in alignment with full non-discriminatory access. Make certain that they should be. Open access tariff would expect you to do that, but there are some stickiness, and how do you navigate those two together? Reduce and avoid creating transactional friction. This is more the economic efficiency. So as you think about the seam, and again, trying to avoid the seam or making the seam as minimum as possible, the objective is to reduce that transactional friction, not creating additional costs or inefficiencies across the system. Obviously, at least in the West, the EIM, EDAM, Markets Plus is developing. All of them recognize some autonomy of the regional entity partners. And that's the balancing area role, the transmission service provider role. And I think as we navigate the seams, it's not just going to be a market operator to market operator discussion, but it's going to be a broader discussion in partnership with those regional entities who are maintain operational control of their balancing area and also operational control of their transmission service. I already talked about respecting the transmission rights, and again, there's a lot of adjacent operating agreements that exist. They exist because those seams existed, and there have been years of effort to operationalize those seams, and those are documented in the operating agreements. Not to suggest that a market seam couldn't modify or enhance those agreements, but we all have to be cognizant of what those agreements are and be informed by the starting point of what has already been agreed to. I think everybody focuses on the next one. I think while the seems is a big box of topics, oftentimes it gets boiled down to, okay, what's the equitable way of allocating flow capability across the system, across two systems that are not being co-optimized. That seems to be the focus oftentimes when we talk about seams. And so we have to be cognizant of that as a principle, and that equitability, and how do you maintain that across two systems operating and optimizing separately. The last one, I think, is something that is maybe something we should keep on the radar, and that is, as seams exist, we should make sure that the seam is not leveraged or creates a market power situation, and strategically try to design and avoid that. It's kind of a corollary to avoiding transactional friction, but I would say it's more pointed in the sense that to the extent the seam can be strategically created to exercise market power, I think we have to be cognizant of that, aware of it, and figure out how to avoid that. So do those principles resonate? Just curious. Everybody's shaking their head some way. Well, I look forward to my fellow panelists to enhance, add, subtract from those principles, but at least from the CAISO perspective internally, our thoughts, this is what we came. Next slide, please. Okay. So again, seams are not new discussions. We have been dealing with seams largely on an operational level for years. In our role, in our RC West role, we are currently navigating the operational seam when it comes to fair, equitable curtailment processes, especially kind of enhancement to the unscheduled flow mitigation. People point to that, but we are working in collaboration with SPP and others at NSB, forwarding an idea of enhancing that and the use of the enhanced curtailment calculator to effectuate fair and processes for curtailment of flow issues across the system. And you could say, well, why do you need an enhanced curtailment calculator if you have a global congestion management system? And I think the reality is that not everybody's under congestion management. There are transactions that create flow across the system that are not subject to redispatch within the market footprint, and the enhanced curtailment calculator would help remedy that. And we expect that it would coordinate with the market. In other words, the enhanced curtailment calculator could provide what the market has to redispatch for, at the same time declaring what unscheduled flow or unscheduled transactions need to be curtailed. Again, honoring priority rights in terms of the transmission they're utilizing. But this is an effort going on right now, and we look forward to it opening up some new capability for addressing what we are experiencing now, and that is unscheduled flow and management of that unscheduled flow across the system. The RC West has a full network state estimator, and as does the other RCs in the West, and we should be utilizing that and utilizing the information. It's got a lot of good valuable information. It's got the sensitivities about what flow is created by what transactions, and leveraging that, I think, a operational opportunity here and now. Next slide, please. So in terms of prioritizing seams, and I alluded to this already, and you've heard it in some of the opening comments, we can't do everything all at once and solve all seams at the same time. We have to prioritize, we have to stage this, and in that regard, staging the seams issues that relate to EDAM go live, I think, are our primary concerns. And that goes to resolving seams between EDAM and WEIM, resolving some of the seams of flow across the system. In a way, the congestion revenue allocation topic was sort of an internal seams topic. And so getting through those and getting resolution to those is, I think, our primary focus and what we will be focusing on in the near term. In the longer term, we understand Markets Plus will be stood up. But at this point in the schedule of Markets Plus, that's further off. And I think as a result of that, starting those Markets Plus seam discussions may still be off into the future, not forever, but at least potentially for another year. And then we will also have some experience of EDAM up and running that will also help us inform and any kind of market to market discussion. I'm painting a picture here that of a workflow, of a plan. I don't have that here to present today, but I think over the next few months and weeks, I think we endeavor to lay out what is a seams discussion plan and what seams are right and ready for discussion now and resolution, and which ones can be staged and for future discussion. Again, launching EDAM is our main focus, and resolving any of those immediate seams issues, especially as they relate to reliability, but also market efficiency for EDAM go live. As we look to the future, and I alluded to this before, where we don't have a seam or where we have kind of efficiently operated, we want to avoid creating a seam. And in that regard, I throw out here as a concept, nothing in detail, but we should explore those opportunities. We should understand and learn from our WEIM experience, and how can we learn from that in a way to mitigate and not create a real-time seam, especially where one does not exist today. And the EIM works very efficiently over a wide footprint, and we believe that how do you maintain that even as markets may fragment? We should look for those opportunities and explore them and be open to them. There are seam discussions going on now. They come in the form of coordination discussions. Part of those are triggered by things like RT West. RT West, but also RTO West standing up by SPP. There are some adjacency topics that are already in play between Pacific Core and RTO West and other neighboring adjacent balancing areas. I just throw out there that there are some specific constraint areas that we are actively engaged with our partners and our balancing area partners, whether it be in Pacific Core's Wyoming area, Massa difficulty area, where there's some constraints, Path 80 through the Northwestern system, north of Pearl management in the EPA and Portland system, or as I mentioned, the RTO West coordination as they endeavor to be up and running in the spring of next year. Those are timely, those are live, and we are engaged in those discussions again with our partners. And they may create some groundwork, some framework into future discussions as well. I'll just say that many of these are at the very preliminary stages, largely talking about what data information should be shared and how to do that. They have not entered into the more challenging discussions about how to allocate flow capability, but I expect that they will in some way. Please. Okay, so again, as we stage our work, we have to recognize and scope into the timeline engagement with the balancing areas, the transmission service provider, and recognize their roles and responsibilities.
Next slide, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Yeah, so scoping into the issues and scoping it in coordination with responsible entities, including the balancing area roles and the transmission service provider roles. Creating forums for these to be discussed and vetted. Working through and being cognizant of existing reliability standards, existing agreements in the West. Like I said earlier, the discussions that we are in now, largely we're talking about boilerplate. How do you exchange data? How do you coordinate information? Which is the easy part, but it's a tedious part of the discussions. And it does take a lot of words to accomplish that. But we will get to the more important market to market discussions. What are the WEC standards? Working through things like NESB with the ECC, Enhanced Performance Calculator, working in collaboration with the reliability coordinators so that the SEAMS both works from a market perspective, but also an operational perspective. And the last but not least, and this is where I think the focus is going to be for the balance of the discussion, is as we get into the market operator to market operator SEAMS discussions, how do we do that in the West when we know those forums have to engage the balancing area, the transmission service provider, and more generally, how do we bring all these topics back for visibility, review, and input from the general stakeholders? I don't think we can just have the market operators go off into a corner, come up with something, and then say, okay, here's the agreement. There's going to have to be a lot of back and forth, a lot of engagement, because again, the balancing area, the transmission provider, and the stakeholders more generally. And I think that may be a slight difference in terms of experience, in terms of SEAMS discussion that may have happened and been initiated in the East, where you had largely RTOs discussing with RTOs. This is a bigger set of discussions, larger set of parties, and maybe a bit more complicated to navigate. And we have to just recognize that going into the discussion and not set ourselves up for failure to expect that this is just going to be strictly a market operator to market operators. So that's my perspective. Hopefully that helps and maybe sets the course of the rest of this.
Thank you, Mark. All right, we are next going to go to I seated you guys in the wrong order. All right. I seated you in alphabetical order, not in TV. Is this on? Yes, excellent. I'm Pam Sporboard, Director for Transmission and Markets at Portland General, and I think a lot of my comments are going to echo Mark's comments about reliability first, addressing the SEAMS in chronological order as they come up, and really emphasizing the need to continue to have deliberate and coordination that focuses on maintaining the value of the systems that we've built today and the coordination that we've built across the West. So I do think my main point, the thing I most want to emphasize, is that our number one priority as an EDAM entity scheduled to go live in the fall of 2026 is for EDAM to go live. And a lot of the conversations that distract from the ISO's focus on EDAM go live or our focus on EDAM go live are just non-starters. EDAM is one of the bright spots that we have in a very challenging landscape around customer affordability. EDAM is a key piece of our long-term strategic goals in order to enhance customer affordability while providing the renewables integration and reliability enhancements that we expect to see from that market. The EDAM is a key strategic goal for PGE, and a lot of the components of the EDAM design are those that are particularly important for PGE around congestion revenue allocation, transmission utilization, and some of the other pieces of the framework that we believe are building on the successful foundation of the WEM, the strong transmission connectivity for the current EDAM footprint, and a lot of resource diversity that we can access through the co-optimization through that market. And so I think really emphasizing the importance of the EDAM and the amount of effort it takes to
get that market up and running and making that a continued focus of the prioritization for both the utility community as well as for the ISO leadership remains essential for us as we are racing our way to 2026. When it comes down to SEAM specifically, I think there are a couple foundational principles that we need to put in place as we are looking to engage in these conversations and expand the dialogue between the Markets Plus and SVP committed entities and the EDAM committed entities. And the first thing I think is what has become a communication seam. One of the things that I personally value most about the WEIM is how much we learned about each other as we joined that market. I think prior to the EIM, our community was primarily in the Pacific Northwest, really centered around Bonneville, and that through the EIM participation, we gained relationships across the entire region. I learned about the transmission challenges and the very different way that transmission works in the desert Southwest. Got a lot of perspective on interconnection enhancements and the learnings and the relationships created through the EIM and the deeper understanding created and percolated a lot of best practices and a lot of knowledge around the region that was very valuable, not just in the market space, but relationships that percolated our utilities as a whole, and even with our sector partners in the IPP community and in the NGO community. However, I think as we've been making our market choices and championing the market that we have chosen, and for very different reasons and on all valid reasons, we have broken up some of this communication and understanding that has been the foundation of the last 10 years in the Pacific North or in the West. And as those market footprints are aligning and coming into focus, I think we have an opportunity to step back and reset the way we are communicating with each other and recognizing that we all have common interests at heart. We all want reliability, we all want affordability, and we are all making choices that are in the best interests of our customers. And bringing the conversation back to these foundational principles and bringing alignment and collaboration back together rather than using some of the divisive language that has been dividing us of late, I think is a first step in addressing seams. We have to be nice to each other. I think the second thing I would like to talk about, and that I think Mark's presentation drove this home fundamentally. The first goal of SEAMS is reliability first, economics second. I think a lot of the conversation and a lot of the push has been on this sexy market to market and how are we going to get the economic optimization going. But the primary goal, and I think the first goal of a SEAMS negotiation, is to maintain and enhance the reliability of the West. Mark touched on some of the unscheduled loop flow, some of the other key areas of operational challenge. We experience North Pearl, that is basically, we call it the North Pearl or NOPE flow gate. We call it NOPE, you can't deliver energy to Portland, no matter where it is in the Northwest. And so really being able to focus on how to operationally address these challenging conditions where for PGE, that looks like unexpected kind of flows across our system when Southwest solar is being brought up into the Pacific Northwest in large quantities. And how do we mitigate and enhance and prevent some of those overloads through a coordinated focus on reliability first? So I think unscheduled flow, some of what Mark talked about with congestion and loading relief, these are the first and foundational goals of a SEAMS agreement. However, I think the emphasis here and the unique component that is in the West is that it's the transmission providers and the balancing authorities that are the ones that have to take the ultimate action in resolving those reliability issues. So while we can have market to market negotiations, ensuring that the transmission providers who are going to be effectuating the actions under the SEAMS agreement are at the table and are part of the conversation is a foundational principle that we need to have and recognize as the unique characterization of the West, where we're overlaying a market on top of an vote and balancing authority paradigm. So I think then once we have those reliability issues addressed, we can then continue to think about the economic overlay and how to get the economic optimization out of the market. Again, I think Mark touched on some of the unique issues and potential market power concerns that arise when you do have the unique situation that we have with two market operators and still have a multitude of balancing authorities with the transmission rights holders being able to opt in their transmission across different market footprints and for different usage. And so I think that market power consideration was really emphasized by FERC in their recent order on Markets Plus needs to be a foundational part of this SEAMS negotiation and agreement, and probably a uniquely important aspect of SEAMS coordination for the West. The third thing I'd like to talk about, I call it, SEAMS are more difficult than you think. We talk about this like we're gonna talk, we're gonna sit down and we're gonna work out the SEAMS agreement. But those SEAMS agreements are hundreds and hundreds of pages long and take years to negotiate. For example, the Lake Erie loop flow, once it got to FERC, I don't know how long they were negotiating this before it got to FERC. But the first open docket on Lake Erie loop flow from the NYISO side was in 2008. And the last order on loop flow was in 2018. So that was a 10-year process. I overlapped at FERC for a brief part of that. And my neighbor across the hall was the staff person assigned to Lake Erie loop flow. And he would curse very loudly anytime a new filing was made in that docket. So not an easy process. Similarly, MISO for Lake Erie loop flow, their first filing was in 2010. The last one was in 2017. So a 7-year process, a little bit shorter than the NYISO process, but still a very protracted, contentious fight over where FERC will ultimately align. Also, SPP and the MISO self-integration, that SEAMS agreement was filed unexecuted at FERC for the first time in 2014 and was not concluded until 2016 with a number of iterations in and out of court cases to resolve that. So in other words, this is not something that we're going to kick off one day and end in a quarter and move on from there. I also think that even once these themes are in place and that they are agreed upon and we're no longer engaged in contentious battles, that there are economic optimization opportunities that arise and have to be worked out as we learn more about the scene and are able to incorporate new findings. I believe a 2023 DMM report from MISO identified that the MISO SPP SEAM resulted in uneconomic transactions over 60% of intervals. And so there's an opportunity to continue to look at making those more advanced and more economic over time, but these will take many, many iterations to work through. So then I think I'm getting to my last point. And again, I'm echoing a lot of what Mark said, so hopefully I'll just do this less articulately and a little quicker. But I think we need to start by building a SEAMS roadmap. Again, I'll go back to my very first point. Our number one priority is getting the EDAM up and running so that our customers can begin to reap the benefits of that market participation and the optimization opportunities that the EDAM provides. And so we really need to keep our eye on that 2026 go live for the spring for PacifiCorp and in the fall for PGE. After that, I think we've already learned that as we implement EDAM, there is an opportunity to look at the EDAM to WEIM seam. And there will need to be some enhancements that are made to the coordination between those two markets to minimize any seam between an EDAM participant and a WEIM participant. I know that we've heard from all EIM community members, regardless of the market of choice, that the EIM remains a very important operational tool for them that is a valuable and important asset that they continue to track and are invested in all the way through market cutover. And so in being able to focus on that WEIM and ensuring that it maintains and improves the value for the region as we look at the transition to the EDAM, I think is a key priority that will bring benefits to the 80% of the West that is participating in the EIM, even as we go through the first tranche of EDAM go live. The second, I think we have some opportunities to look at RA seams and RA coordination. With RAP, we understand that there are some seams between the RAP footprints and the market footprints, and how to look at getting some optimization opportunities out of the market and ensuring that the RAP forward showing and the RAP operations program are able to be optimized through the market footprint and opportunities, and how best to achieve that. And I think there's ongoing conversations across all stakeholders looking to get at that goal. And after that, once we've addressed some of the reliability and the foundational modeling and loop flow opportunities, once we have looked at EIM and RA seams, I think that's when we really get into the market to market seams and the economic optimization opportunities that I hope we can find and negotiate through that process. However, I do think it's foundational to recognize, again, the role of the transmission provider and the balancing authority and the role of the OAT tariff as foundational documents that are precursors to being able to have a seams agreement overlay. So uniquely in the West, we will have two market operators, and then we will have two or more entity tariffs. We have the EDAM entity tariff, and we will have the Markets Plus entity tariff. And at this point, we have 3 out of 4 of those agreements. We have 2 that are approved by FERC. One, the PacifiCorp and PGE OATs that are pending FERC right now. And we also will need to see the Markets Plus entity tariff before we can really understand how best to bridge a seams agreement between these two markets. And why I think that's so critically important is because we really need to first understand how each market is going to collect data from market participants, what timelines that data gathering will be, when that data will be transmitted to the market operator, when the market operator will run their own optimization runs. And once we have that timeline, I think at that point, and it's clear for both markets, and both markets understand the timing processes. And believe me, in working out our own vote, we learned a lot about what kind of timing and customer communications, and when we will have to publish data and when we will have to require customers to give us data, and working through that and understanding that and how that data can be given to ISO for their own optimization and the kind of the iteration between the balancing authority, transmission provider, and the market operator, and how those iterations will work to give customers the information they need is, I think, foundational to when we can overlay that market to market coordination between those two. That, I think, to bottom line, I think we need to see a Markets Plus entity tariff before this negotiation can be really brought to the forward and to be kind of balanced and equitable for both sides of the two footprints. And so I think that's incredibly important going forward. And I think the final point that I'll conclude with is that transmission providers are key stakeholders in the seams negotiation and operations. And transmission providers must be put at the table. And if you have specific questions about how your transmission rights are going to be operationalized in either market, or in a market that you have chosen or not chosen, then I think the first place that you need to talk is your transmission provider, because you have a contract with them. It's their tariff that is governing the agreement between the transmission customer and the transmission provider. And that's at the start of how we will figure the next steps out. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Pam. And now we are going to geographically head to the east and hear from Kathy Anderson of Idaho Power.
I don't know how far east I really am, but yeah, so I just kind of want to say ditto, I guess, at this point in time. I think it's kind of all been said. So for those that don't know, I've spent 19 of my 20 years in the reliability side of Idaho Power. So everything I view, even though Idaho Power lets me play in this market world a little bit, is always through the lens of reliability. And so when you ask me questions about, seams or how things are going to work, that's immediately where my mind goes. And then, people then start talking economics and my head starts to explode a little bit. So for me, you will always hear me answer like reliability first, always reliability. What are you going to do to the reliability? I'm also fiercely protective of my own system. And so as anyone knows who's trying to talk about using Idaho Power system, you'll see my back start to bow if you haven't come and talked to me about that. And so that's just kind of where I land and where I sit. And I'll just tell you, the first year of my career at Idaho Power was in finance, but I supported operations. So yeah, I'm really ingrained there. When I think about seams again, right now, Idaho Power is quite honestly focused on the seam that PacifiCorp is going to create with us when they move to EDAM. They are on two sides of us. And so they also are planning on using our system to connect their two sides. You geographically think about where we sit. So that changes a few things for us. And so we're pretty engaged in the seams conversations of what does it look like to be an EIM entity when the EDAM entity next to you goes into that world, and how does that change, and what kind of data do we now see, and what does that do to us again from the reliability side of the house. And so that's the first seam I'm always focused in. And as others make their market choices and start to move in that direction, and if you touch me, I'm going to have that same conversation and concern. And so those are the seams that I really focus on. Touching my VA, are you going to use my system? So let's have this conversation about what your expectations are, because we need to know that to keep reliability. So they asked if I had any slides, and I said I didn't, but then I joked with Kelsey and Pam that I had this one particular meme, and it's Buzz Lightyear and Woody from Toy Story. And Buzz Lightyear's got his arm around Woody, and he points out to kind of the horizon. He goes, chaos everywhere. And so my ask is we don't create chaos and chaos everywhere when we do this. And so we methodically think about what these timing of these agreements really need to be. And again, for me, it is, BAA to BA conversations as those BAs start to transition to their new world. It's TSP to TSP conversations as much as we can try to coordinate that. It is transmission customer to their transmission service provider and that BA. And then when the market operators decide to get together as a TSP and a BA who is 100% responsible for the reliability of their area and the operation of their system, I need to be in the room. Because again, neither CAISO or SPP can speak for me in the agreements in which I have control over. And so that will be very important for us as well. Again, those that know me know I'm kind of a control freak, so that just take that for what that is. So, but so again, I think as long as we all have these common things, goals in mind, and that is, affordable, reliable, affordable for our customers, regardless of where it's ultimately land. I think listening to each other and communicating with each other and trying to find the solutions that work. I think the people in the West, right? We do hard things, and we do hard things every day. This is just another hard thing we've got to figure out. But I would just say, keep talking to each other, keep talking in the right order. I mean, let's not jump over and things. And I would also say, if you're standing up a market right now and trying to be there by 2026, keep moving towards that and not let other distractions kind of be there. So I like the idea of a roadmap. I think it would be good to be able to line up where everyone thinks the priorities of some of these agreements are. But, you know, as an entity who honestly has a very strong probability of having two markets form around them before they go anywhere, those conversations with me as a TSP and a BA are going to be more important to me than necessarily the two market operators having a conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you for your perspective, Kathy. All right, we're going to, let's see that microphone. Now we're going to head to the Southwest and welcome Kelsey Martinez to provide comments from PNM's perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll also say I'm not going to have much to add to the principles. I think we've got a pretty good high level concept of what it's going to take. So, but I do welcome the opportunity to whine to an audience that might understand a little bit about our future with SEAMS and how maybe some specifics of our system and kind of where the West is headed with intermittent renewable resources is just really adding to this problem. So I'm just going to throw out a few statements and then kind of fill them in as we go. Because, you know, I had some remarks in my head, but now listening to them, I'm just going to kind of wing it a little bit more than I was planning on it. So I agree with what everyone did say, but I do want to add on a few highlights. So things I've heard are, you know, like, you know, clear focus on reliability. Absolutely, of course, that's got to be the first principle here. I also came from, you know, a reliability shop that's spent most of the time like Kathy in the control room environment and really just try to have a good understanding of how we're actually going to accomplish things with our tools in real time. But where we may differ a little bit is like, I really see that we cannot separate reliability from economics. It just, maybe it used to work. There used to be a very clear differentiation, and now all the tools that are capable of helping us in these situations are really the ones that were built because everyone follows the money, right? So economics have provided the tools that we need to fix SEAMS issues or to not make them worse anyway. Also, I would just, you know, I think it was mentioned that SEAMS are not new. I agree, SEAMS are not new, but what is new is that our system is completely different now because of overbuilt intermittent resources. That's completely changed the speed and the way in which we are going to have to deal with SEAMS going into the future. So I'll just fill in a little bit and maybe I'll refer back to my notes here somewhat. So let me get it. So I'm hoping like the roadmap is definitely in our future and something we need to work towards, and it'll really allow us to be part of the narrative that CAISO and EDAM entities are not avoiding the SEAMS discussion, but implementing what others have raised as concerns and showing a clear roadmap of what speed and when and what timeline we will approach them. I'm hoping that we can kind of collectively recognize that reliability SEAMS are the most important. Anything involving the day ahead market can almost be postponed because day ahead SEAMS are not going to create reliability issues. Real-time SEAMS are. So I'm much more worried about the SEAMS that are going to be created if the EIM footprint breaks apart, and much less worried about the SEAMS that will be created as we work through day ahead market optimization. So it would be my wish as someone who is just daily faced with a lot of congestion from renewables that we focus on SEAMS that are in real time. So there's still a few of those. There's going to be EIM to EIM. There's going to be EIM to, you know, later on potentially to a different real time market. But those are the ones that I would hope we focus on first. The EIM footprint has allowed us to integrate most of our renewables, and we will be faced with a completely new problem when we have the same renewable mix, but we don't have the connectivity through EIM that we used to. there are efforts that others have mentioned that are targeting those seams and basing it appropriately on ways that they're managed in the east, and they're ahead of us with seam and congestion processes. But I want to make sure that we're not targeting kind of like technology or ideas that are now 25, 26 years old. So a lot of the seams tools that they use in the east they're literally from 1999, if AI is correct. Yeah, so that's kind of when they came up with the TLR procedure and the IDC calculator. So congestion is identified. That creates tag curtailments, which are then fed to the BAs and transmission providers. Then those BAs and transmission providers look at the tags, approve the tags, and then work on curtailing things appropriately. And then when the congestion is resolved, then some of those tags are reloaded. That doesn't really, that worked when we had coal and gas and hydro that largely followed dispatch signals. But with wind and solar, primarily the ones that are being overbuilt and creating more and more congestion, the timescales for tagging solutions are just not going to work. So a few reasons for this. So the tags do not always, in some cases they do, but usually, at least in our system, tags do not automatically result in a change in output from a generator. So it's usually the case that the BA gets a tag. They may have to call a resource and ask for a curtailment. They may have to put it manually into an EMS system to initiate that curtailment. They may need to call other BAs that are calling theirs. So I mean, sometimes it can be 3 or 4 phone calls. And another big change is that generation used to be big and centralized. So we would have 4 750 megawatt coal plants that you could call one operator and make that work. Now we have 100 little solar sites and wind farms. So trying to manage that through manual communication or manual inputs into a system is not something that is doable. So in New Mexico anyway, curtailments of renewables, which is basically what we're talking about here with congestion, is probably our leading operational problem. So we don't have good ways to effectively curtail things that is dynamic enough to keep up with congestion, and that is fair and equitable, which is what we're needing to do from a FERC perspective. And the only way to really accomplish this is to use tools like security constrained economic dispatch. And those tools talk directly to the generators without a bunch of tagging time lag. The market tools talk directly to the generators, and the generators curtail or move back up according to the market signals. So even though the discussions definitely have to involve BA to BA and transmission providers, I don't feel like we have the tools within our BA community to manage congestion. We need the market tools to manage congestion, and the market tools use economics to effectuate reliability. So I don't want us as the West to get too far along into tool development or principles about real-time seams without looking into market-to-market seams, which is adding economics into the equation. Another reason why we need to not differentiate between reliability and economics is because the only way we're really going to get where we need to be is if we create incentives to our resources to follow market signals. So if we are just curtailing them without any incentives, they're always going to push back. There's never going to be any reason to fix the way they work. And really what's valuable in our system are not resources that just want to be at full output all the time to meet tax credit incentives or rec incentives. We need to create incentives that recognize what's valuable on our system, which is following market signals. And that's not going to happen overnight if we create market-to-market congestion tools, but it will start to allow BAs and those negotiating PPAs and contracts to have a tool to say, if you bid into our market and participate in this market, here's how you're going to be compensated. That may, in the long run, start to be just as good as the recs they're going to earn or the tax credits for just meeting all this straight output. So for instance, in New Mexico, we have, way more solar than load every day. We have a data center customer that brought 800 megawatts of resources and their load is 150 megawatts. And we get, we get charged to curtail them. So there's a lot of contract involvement in this as well. So if we had incentives through the market to start negotiating our PPAs differently and start interacting with our large customers differently, that's going to be kind of the way to start managing congestion over the long run. Let's see. So yeah, I think those are my main asks, that we focus on real-time seams because those are the ones creating a reliability problem, and that we don't try to separate BA and market like a black and white line, because we are reliant on the market for reliability today. My biggest concerns are definitely not the seams created by a day-ahead market, but by the breakup of the EIM footprint. And that, if PNM is almost at 70% carbon free, I think we're much further along than others, but this could be your future as well, where anything tag based is not going to be at all in the timelines needed to fix curtailment and fix congestion. So those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you to all the panelists. So we are going to shift to some Q&A next. I think I'm going to, given how we're doing on time and the wonderful content we've heard, going to change the plan a little bit. I'm going to start off with one of our prepared questions, and then I think we'll kind of alternate and give some chance to make sure that we get plenty of audience questions. So we'll start off with one question, and then before we go to audience questions, we'll get instructions on how to do questions for WebEx. So you covered a lot of our questions in your comments, which is great. One thing I wanted to circle back on, Mark noted that there are many existing operational agreements between BAs and entities. What are your thoughts on how the market builds on those existing operational agreements to support efficient market operations and facilitate reliability going forward?
Here's the point. Yeah, so I guess I would speak. So we have a few of those. And I think, as EIM evolved, we had to take a look at those agreements. A lot of them are quite honestly more along the lines of, joint owned assets, joint owned generation, joint owned everything. A little bit less. We're pretty fortunate. We don't have any grandfathered transmission agreements left in our system. And so, we've had to take a look at those when we were going into EIM. In fact, we had to look at them when other entities were going into EIM, and those that went before us, we were on the side of, you got to honor our agreement. And then as we moved into there, it became, how do we make this agreement kind of work within this market so that we all benefit? And I agree, with Kelsey, when I say reliability first, EIM has been extremely beneficial to us from the reliability perspective and the integration of all of the renewables and the ability to rely on each other in that real time to, both take the excess and, move around the power. And so, but some of those operational agreements, we had to take a look at and say, okay, if we're going to do this, how do we modify this to allow it so that, what I own and what you own can actually be optimized, even though the agreements may say you can't use my stuff. And so how do we work, with that agreement? How do we modify that agreement? How do we let the CAISO know about this agreement? And how do these things stand? So I think you may see some of the similar things go with the movement to the day ahead, and especially more with the breakup of EIM. You may see some of that partnership now start to kind of go back, and we're going to take a look at those agreements and say, well, now we really do have to go back to where you can't use my stuff and I can't use your stuff. And it's going to start to maybe be a little bit more complex back to that operational, because you just don't have that opportunity to share it all.
When we talk about operating agreements, I think there's traditional balancing agreements. Some of them are long-standing, things like the coordinated operating agreement for toy, been established cooperation there that we have to be aware of and understand. But there have been, since EIM, there have been new agreements that have been established. The coordinated transmission agreement with BPA is a good example of maybe you call it a Siemens agreement, maybe you call it a predecessor, but it's just how do we interact with each other? How do we use congestion to the benefit of all? And how do we have more effective outcomes in the reliability space and the congestion management space? And I think that was a great outcome. And the question is now, how do you migrate that to a day ahead time frame, or a situation where you've got now multiple markets operating in the same space? I think that's the discussion that's going to have to happen. I think, but I think we have a good framework of what's important coming into those discussions. We got to a good place on that, and I'm confident we get to a good place going forward. But we have to acknowledge again the principles that went into that in the first place, and make sure that we are consistent with those principles.
I'm trying to wrap my head around what I want to say here, so hopefully it will come out in the right way. I mean, I think the West has we've been building on a lot of legacy agreements and legacy systems. There are enshrined agreements from the 70s to support voltage in Central Oregon. And that I think one of the challenges in coming in with these, high level tariffs is ensuring that the physics that are the goal of these agreements, that we're physically able to operate the system in a reliable way, are maintained. And I think that's the principal goal, and to look at ways to get, I think what Kathy was saying is can we find ways to maximize value while still honoring the principles and the physical operational characteristics that are the foundation of some of these legacy agreements and historic agreements that are really on the geography of the West. And I think there's a second piece here where we are an interwoven community in the West. I have rights on the BPA system. I serve BPA transfer customers, and we have to be able to continue to operate based on the agreements that we have in place today, and try not to claw back or unwind the kinds of operating paradigms that have allowed the region to evolve and do the integration and to become intertwined. And that those are, I think, are kind of a building block, or we're a starting place. And that looking at those and seeing where we can find ways to optimize our opportunities, but that we can't go backwards from the kinds of foundational agreements that have underpinned long-term investments from each of our utilities on behalf of our customers, and making sure that we're finding ways to really make sure that those customers are continuing to benefit from the investments that have been made on their behalf, while finding new ways to get additional value.
Yeah, I think from P&M's perspective, there are a lot of operational plans, but none of them really address congestion because it just wasn't as much of an issue for EIM. So now we'll be creating seams where we didn't have operational agreements that will address them before EIM. I think the main things that come to mind for me are just that we need to make sure that, I really agree with the approach, perhaps, that we focus on getting EDAM up and running. We look at, what seams are going to be created and how the systems are acting and what tools are available, and then work on building new agreements kind of from scratch in a lot of places that are modern and that really make use of the technology and the intelligence that's involved with the market operations tools.
Thank you. Okay, with this, we're going to open up for questions from the audience in the room and online. So I'm going to pause for a moment and let Silas give instructions for how to ask a question if you are on the WebEx.
For our attendees on the WebEx, you can please press the raise hand icon on WebEx if you would like to ask a question. The raise hand icon is within the participants panel. You may need to click participants in your bottom right corner, and then you can click the raise hand icon if you would like to ask a question. You may also send written questions through the WebEx chat by opening up the chat again in the bottom right corner and sending your question to all panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Silas. So let's start. Are there any questions in the room? Started. Pause for a moment, give the 10 seconds of awkward silence. All right, Julie, thanks.
Hi folks, this is Tuli from Chilean, and I have very detailed notes, and I appreciate all of your the thought that has gone into your remarks. Pam, I have a follow-up question for you. Your comment on there being a communication seam really struck me, and I'm curious if you have could you expand on that? Do you have kind of a vision for how to kind of correct that, or what would be some proactive steps to have more kind of collaborative discussions moving forward?
So, yeah. I mean, I think one of the challenges is that we've created two separate rooms, and that in those rooms it's easy to make assumptions about people sitting in the other room. And the easiest way to break down that theme is to actually sit in the same room together. I think there's that. I mean, I think this has been happening on both sides. I think that we all own this breakdown of communication and the preference to make assumptions rather than to pick up the phone. And so I really do think that the way to fix that is to pick up the phone. Like if you hear about like a market design choice that doesn't sit right with you, to actually call and try to understand the foundation behind that choice, instead of saying it's, not just unreasonable or like found against principles, like to really try to actually understand like why and how that design is consistent with the overall design of the market. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we have two day ahead markets that in many ways are very similar, but have some specific differences that matter to the people who have chosen those markets. And I think we should first try to understand why those differences are important and why they matter to the overall integrity of that particular market design, rather than throwing stones at each other. And like, I think one of my favorite phrases in this whole process is, it bends credulity that you would propose this. It struck me as funny. But so I think that like we've stopped talking to each other, and that's a really simple thing to fix.
John Rumble from Southern California Edison. More thoughts than really just a question, but I've heard two different things that I am curious, maybe have a little bit more explainer. First is there are very specific fears about the breakup of EIM, which people actually haven't really talked about that very much. Which in my mind then create even more scenes. And the second being that we make is there's sort of undercurrent. This is not a market operated to market operator. Negotiations. This is all part of negotiation. With those barriers, how do you see this working successfully to get good seams agreements, to get a most economically efficient set of systems in the West? What are those 2 or 3 key things that you want to make that successful?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that question yet. I mean, I think again, we're at the point where we're trying to align on principles rather than on technologies or timelines. And I do go back to, I think it is going to be very important to see the markets plus entity tariff so that we can actually like find out where those lines can, where we can line up. I was looking today at some SPP materials about the real-time market and like I think the market run is 30 minutes before each operating interval. The CAISO has a 15-minute market run at T minus 37.5 and another at 7.5. And so like those are pretty far apart in terms of like when those market runs will take place. And so I think we have to, and then the entity tariff for the WEIM requires transmission customers to submit their base schedules by T57. And so I think we need to understand like how T57 feeds into the T37.5 and on what, like, and then the T7.5. And now I'm lost. I know probably everyone in the room is lost. But and then how, like with the markets plus, if it is a T minus 30, like what is the end or the customer side of that to get those inputs? And then between those timelines, where can we figure out how to find the, like, where can we find out how to mitigate impacts of potential flows and potential dispatch? Like, where are those windows? So I don't think I have enough information today to get past like that alignment on principle. But I think I went around about not answering your question by kind of illustrating what information I think I need before that question can be answered. Maybe someone else is smarter than me.
Well, no, no, it's not been had yet. I think I personally have a mental block trying to figure out how to design a market that is potentially creating seams. And I've always been trying to say, oh, how do we make something more efficient? And now the question is, well, how do we try to navigate and an efficiency, reliability when something is breaking apart? And it's a different framing that I think I struggle with how to do that in the best way. And unfortunately, I think we have to be open with ourselves and say, and maybe ask ourselves a question: why does it have to be this way? Why does it have to be the way we're thinking it has to be, or the way it's been described to us? And what are the barriers for maintaining and efficient. I think we all mentioned in some way the real time is the rubber, where the rubber meets the road, and reliability is really at hand. How do we maintain that in the best way, recognizing two markets will exist and there's two objectives, there's two, especially the day ahead. How do you do that and think about in the ways that are maybe not intuitive to us and may not even be clear that those are possible? So I guess my point is, for me, right, maintain an open mind and not get mind blocked about those ideas.
I'll add on a little bit, and very much aligned with what Pam and Mark said. So I think, the best approach might be to agree with the other market operator and their participants on the type of seam to focus on first. If it's up to me, it's real time and congestion, and involving the market tools. And then really work on the stuff Pam is talking about, which is horribly complicated and is just going to make everyone change their mind. So that's maybe that's how we can kind of start to evolve these conversations. It's just bringing in those that were not involved, like the tool vendors, like PCI and ODI, and getting those timelines worked out and talking with the operational folks that understand the inefficiencies and the complications that will result out of it. Because those discussions have not always been a part of the decision-making part at the high level. Not that I'm very optimistic, but I think maybe it will at least slow down the real-time seams that could be created.
Question, civil, PvP. Can panelists elaborate on any immediate RAP-related seam issues that you see in the forum for addressing these? Yeah. You can.
So, I mean, I think the goal of RAP is to be interoperable with both market footprints. And I think there's pieces of that between a forward showing program and a real-time operations program that, okay, I'm gonna get complicated, like includes, so in the real time, the RAP is looking to identify those entities who are surplus and those entities who are deficit, and match them up based on geographic footprint. The RAP has a relevant geographic region of the Pacific Northwest based around the Mid-Sea hub and the Desert Southwest, based around some transmission connectivity. And that as we get into the day ahead timeframe, the RAP program will identify if you are either a surplus or a deficit entity and offer the opportunity for those deficit entities to acquire that holdback obligation from the surplus entity. These geographic footprints do not match up with market footprint today. I think there's an opportunity to evaluate whether there's some openness among RAP participants to realign on geographic footprint. But there's also certain elements of the Markets Plus tariff that have obligations that are tied to RAP participation. And so I think there's some open questions about how and particularly the SPP tariff or the Markets Plus tariff requires any RAP capacity to be included as a must offer into the Markets Plus tariff, or into the Markets Plus market. But then that opens up some questions about how is holdback calculated and delivered to an EDAM entity participant. And so I think these are the kinds of seams that are resolvable and that we can work out. But then I think it involves us sitting in the same room together, to come back to Tully's question about communication seams, and we haven't been sitting in the same room together to talk about them. So I think that that is really an opportunity to take a step to what should be resolvable, so something we should be able to resolve, but does require, I think, some hard work and open and willingness to communicate with a desire to understand where each other are coming from and a desire to look at equitable outcomes for all participants.
I'll just say that EDAM design, I think we did try to take special attention and listen carefully to those potential interoperability issues with RAP and EDAM, and we tried to address those. People may have opinions whether they went far enough or not, but I think we did try to have that discussion, have that dialogue, listen and respond. I think we won't know until things become operational where those tensions, the friction really plays out. I think that for me, the RA scene that is kind of left unmined at this point is cross RA programs unlocking the broader diversity benefits over the wider footprint, even though that they may be different programs. Is there a way or possibility of recognizing another program to unlock broader diversity benefits, recognizing the transition system exists, or not looking at transition, what transition is available? So.
Thank you. All right, Scott, I see you're ready to go.
Thanks, Hadley. Pam and Kathy, you both mentioned EIM and EDAM seams, and with PacifiCorp going live and both of your balancing authorities having boundaries that they will be in EDAM prior to both of your BAs joining EDAM, but you'll both be in EIM. Can you elaborate a little bit more about your biggest concerns in that seam between EDAM and EIM?
Yes, all right. So it's probably not as it's probably pretty widely known if you've looked at a map where PACE sits and where PAC West is and how they connect, and who they go right smack across. And so, you know, we have, we came in after PacifiCorp when we came into EIM. And so we submit a lot of data and had a lot of that control in how the data is submitted to the CAISO that impacts the control within our own system on those interties. We were fortunate enough to come in after NB, we came in after PAC. So most of the people around us, with the exception of Bonneville, was already in. And so it was our responsibility to do that data transfer. So we had confidence in the numbers that we were submitting. We knew how all of that works. Now with PAC going, things like mirrors start to come up. I had no idea what that was. We didn't have any. Evidently, if you're touching the CAISO, you have those things. Now all of a sudden, everything becomes that and not, you know, some kind of ACTSR concept. So I have system changes I have to make. We have to talk about who does data transfers, and evidently maybe it's not me anymore. And then what does that look like? And then it comes down to also, you know, how are they planning if differently to use the transmission that they have both ownership and vote rights, quite honestly, to facilitate their day ahead and maintain within the rights which they have. And so, you know, it just new terminology, new kind of data transfers, new tools that we have to now build in order to, you know, have them continue to operate in ours. And, you know, what does a schedule out of the day ahead mean in my oath, which still calls for base schedules of T57? And how is that data going to get submitted to ensure that I can administer my oath and that the right schedules are captured to create that financial stake in the ground? Because the financial stake in the ground for the EIM tariff and what that's measured against is not the same place for PacifiCorp's is with day ahead awards. And so you start to have this cascading impact of what that could look like.
Kathy said.
I'll just add a little bit. So even though we're not very much connected to PAC, we do have a lot of wind farms in our area that are in different markets. So some are pseudotides, some are dynamically scheduled, but for instance, we have resources connected to our transmission system that are dynamically scheduled to non-CAISO California. We've got ones that are dynamically scheduled to CAISO. We've got ones that are pseudotied to non-CAISO. So there's this big mix of already day-ahead market seams that we've dealt with, and it's pretty complicated. And what it meant for us after a very hard lesson learned was that we really need to pay attention to the day-ahead market, even if we weren't in it. So you've got to try to be really focused on making sure you're on the right customer lists and communication and paying attention to market changes that you didn't even know you needed to pay attention to. And the market operator has a responsibility to make sure they're including those affected that are not direct participants as well. So that's a really big one is the CAISO could do and will need to do a really good job differentiating in all their communications exactly who it applies to and in what way, which is not always very clear in the business practice manuals or the tariff.
I know we have a question in the room here, but I just want to check before we do that. Are there any other questions on the WebEx?
At this time, I'm not seeing any hands up in the verbal queue or further questions in the WebEx chat.
Thank you, Silas. All right.
Thanks. This is Kavina in Renewable Northwest. Most, if not all of you mentioned the importance of the SEAMS roadmap. I wonder if we could drill into that a little further. I'd love to hear what we think beyond just a sense of the timeline. There's a conversation in the Markets Plus context of what the dependencies on the dependencies are, what the contingencies on the contingencies are. So figuring out that sort of Gantt chart of what needs to happen, but is there anything beyond that, a team's roadmap, a purpose beyond that it should serve? I think the thing that's coming to mind for me is who's going to take ownership of these conversations? I think to Pam's point, it's really important to be in a collaborative mindset, but also who's going to be the person that raises their hand and calls people to the same room and says, basically has the incentive to make sure that these conversations go well. So I'm curious about Jenna's ideas.
The roadmap, I think, is something the concept that I think you can tell that all these discussions lead to, well, what's the scene topic? When is it right? When does it need to be discussed? How's it sequence into the EM going live versus Market Plus going live and the footprint that exists? So it's something that I think we endeavor to put together for ourselves, and then certainly we'd be open to sharing that with stakeholders and sharing that with stakeholders and others about what that roadmap looks like, how it engages, or we expect to engage others, whether it be, again, balancing areas, transmission service providers, or market operators along that spectrum. I think to your point, there are some dependencies that may be able to spell out, okay, you need to do A before B for B and then downstream C to be effective. So that sequencing can come out from the roadmap. Like I said, we don't have it today. I think we are endeavoring to develop it so that we can better plan out our work in the SEAMS area and the coordination all the way from, again, EIM to EDAM to EIM SEAMS and to market SEAMS. So we hope that we can put together something comprehensive, get feedback, and maybe that will be the common point of reference of how these discussions would play out and what topics are right. And again, I'm not suggesting that we do this in isolation. We want to maybe come up with it, at least take our first cut at it, and then have discussions with others, see if that resonates and validate the roadmap.
I think a lot of the value in the roadmap is to help ground the conversation. And Kathy reference Toy Story, I'll reference Up, where whenever I think about, we're focused on EDM implementation and we're chugging forward and building our train and riding on our track and the scenes and they're like the dog, squirrel. And I think if we build out this roadmap that whenever we are getting these kinds of, there's these kind of very intense questions about, well, what about the scene? That it can get placed in the appropriate place. And then I think just having an understanding of when and how those conversations will take place help maintain the focus on what we really do need to prioritize. For us, that is bringing the value of the EDAM to our customers so that they can start getting the benefits of the market in the fall of 2026. And so I think that continues to be our priority, but I do understand that this is a high intensity conversation and that there are a lot of these dependencies can raise that anxiety level up even further. And so being able to just map out where that dependency sits and then how it relates to the other pieces of the puzzle, I think helps us avoid that squirrel conversation that I think can really detract from the execution that we all need to do. There's a ton of work on both sides. There's a ton of work from CAISO to build the systems and the integration for EDAM. We are onboarding and signing agreements with our vendors, doing training and education of our staff where we have our technical implementation team, we're onboarding a testing team. So there is no shortage of work. And I think the anxiety around resolving these dependencies is really can take away from the execution of that work. And so just making sure that we build a roadmap out so that we can bring bring calm and focus so that we can really drive towards this two market futures, I think, where that roadmap helps.
This is Kathy, for those that can't see who I am. Yes, I think for me also the value of the roadmap is it gives us a collaboration point with those that are also looking at Markets Plus, right? If I know what this roadmap looks like, and I know, we can collaborate with what that roadmap looks like, then maybe we can determine, again, the priority of the seams that we're all gonna have to work on. I mean, we all are customers of each other. So regardless of what market you're going to be going to, you're likely going to be participating in some way in that other market, whether it's with generation, with load, or wheel it across their system. And so if we can understand what those look like, and the folks that have EDAM priorities can prioritize that, and the folks that have the Markets Plus can prioritize that, then we can start to say, oh, you know what, really, this one should be back here a little bit, right? It's not going to develop and be necessary until we have a much larger footprint. So now let's talk about data flow. Let's talk about, whatever it is that needs to move forward so that things can just be successful. And I don't know about you all, I don't have infinite staff to be pulled in 12 different directions. And so the more coordinated things can be and the more laid out a road plan can be, then the more active I can participate and I think be a lot more successful rather than the squirrel approach, which, while I love the movie, I have enough squirrels in my life that I do not need this. And so I think that that's the value of the roadmap. And I think it just brings a little bit of organization to our chaos. And I think also another benefit, I think we're going to find some things that need to be talked about, we just don't even know about yet, right? I know when we went live on EM, there was a bunch of things that I hadn't even thought that we had to have a conversation about. And now all of a sudden I got to figure out how this is going to work. And, while I did operate real time and we go on the fly in real time, it's not super comfortable to go on the fly when you're talking, these markets. So I think that's going to be the value.
Well, we are right at time to wrap up the panel. So I want to, first of all, thank our panelists for your time and all of your insights today. This has been really wonderful. So thank you. Yeah, just a few things that jumped out that I wanted to know. We covered a lot of ground, so I will not cover everything, but I definitely heard a focus on, the continued focus on grounding and reliability and execution of the markets. This idea that Pam brought up of kind of our communication theme and breaking the communication theme or eliminating it, and then the conversation we were just having around the importance of the roadmap development and the value that can bring. Excellent. Before we wrap up, I just want to note this is the second in a theme series of the RIF. I think going forward, we'll be thinking on the Regional Issues Forum about what the role is for the Regional Issues Forum and continuing this conversation. Certainly, it's an area of a lot of engagement in the region. So we'll be discussing that amongst liaisons and looking for feedback from our broader RIF community on that. So with that, we are right at 2:50. We are going to take a break for about 10 minutes. There are some beverages in the back. And then if you haven't discovered already, bathrooms are down the hall, back past you turn right past the elevators and they're on the right. So we'll see everyone back here at 3 o'clock when we will hear an update on our latest WEIM entrance and invitation.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started and introduce the next panel. So it's been a while since we've had one of these. This is an EIM implementation update so that we can hear from our two newest EIM entities. And can we go ahead and advance to the next slide? Actually, maybe another slide, one more slide. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to kick things off by showing the success of the EIM. I just wanted to take just a brief moment to just kind of review this, because when I was looking this up and seeing where our two new EIM entities were joining the footprint, it's pretty incredible what we've accomplished and how large our footprint actually is. I will acknowledge that we've all had our issues and some of us still have issues today. I know, we're continuing to work through them through the stakeholder process, and there's no denying that. But I don't think anybody can deny the success that the EIM market has actually had today. And I did want to at least indicate, this is from the CAISO's website, but this is from their benefit study. As of March 2025, they have shown, or at least calculated, almost $7 billion in gross benefits through the EIM. And I just think that's pretty incredible considering we started nearly a decade ago. So I just wanted to indicate that before getting started. But I'm very excited to welcome our two next panelists and our two newest EIM entities who will be joining in 2026. I'll start off with Carrie Schlachter. Okay. From the Western Market. She is the Western Markets and Policy Program Manager from Black Hills Energy. Hello, how are you guys? Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Can we advance to the next slide, please? Great. Well, we can probably skip my introduction since you just did it for me. Carrie Schlachter and with Black Hills Energy, Western Markets and Policy. If you guys have any questions afterwards, or reach out anytime. You can go to the next slide. So big things going on at Black Hills, as we've heard a lot from many of the entities here, kind of all, chasing squirrels and also trying to move forward. So our current state is that our system is actually in two balancing authorities. Our South Dakota and Wyoming system is under WAPA, and our Colorado system is under Public Service of Colorado. In April of 2026, WAPA announced that they will no longer be providing balancing authority services and going into the SPP RTO. That put us in a position where we needed to make a decision of what we were going to do moving forward. And we chose to start our own balancing authority at that point. Next slide, please. Energy imbalance markets, current state is that we are currently participating in WEM in both our South Dakota, Wyoming, and our Colorado systems. With the announcement of WAPA going to the RTO, WEM was also agreed to sunset as well upon that go live. We recognize the great impact and value that the imbalance markets have. So we chose to enter the EIM. That was our most viable option, given our geographic footprint. And when I say we chose to join the EIM, that's our South Dakota and our Wyoming system. Colorado is still being determined and being worked out. Part of that EIM is a long timeline of things that need to happen. So I can't even see the slides anymore, but parallel operations are in Q1 of 2026. And our EIM go live is May 6th, 2026. Oh, next slide, please. So we have two major dependencies to make this EIM go live happen. The first one is our balancing authority implementation, which is going to go live April 1. So we will have 1 month of being a balancing authority before we go into the EIM as a real-time market in May of 2026. The second dependency is a transmission project called Ready Wyoming, and that's due to go live Q4 of this year. And that transmission project, I'll cover a little bit, connects our South Dakota and Wyoming system into one continuous system. Next slide, please. So future state. We will be in 2 balancing authorities, but instead of WAPA and PSCO, will be a Black Hills Balancing Authority and PSCO. And under our Black Hills Balancing Authority, that will include Black Hills Power, which is our South Dakota system, Cheyenne Light, which is our Cheyenne, Wyoming utility, City of Gillette, Sheridan, and South Dakota West. We are also pleased that Basin Electric has decided to join our balancing authority with their customer use system. And so we will be supporting their transition into our balancing authority and their EIM participation as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit about us. This is our generation fleet and load makeup. Balancing authority peak will be around 1,100 megawatts. The MSSC will be Basin's dry fork unit at 405 megawatts. We have submitted an application to Western Power Pool. Our estimated peak reserve sharing obligation is 60 megawatts. We do have a pretty innovative large power customers tariff as well as a blockchain tariff. So our blockchain and data center load is rapidly growing. And so our blockchain load, we have those registered as price sensitive dispatchable loads. And then we also have most of our data centers are offset with a pretty large amount of behind the meter capacity. Our generation fleet, we have 810 megawatts of coal, a lot of combined cycle, pretty big gas fleet there, as well as hydro, solar, and wind. Next slide, please. Talked about before, one of our dependencies is the Ready Wyoming Transmission Initiative. So that's a 260-mile transmission line. And that will connect our South Dakota and our Wyoming systems together. We are excited that this is going to expand our access to power markets. It also is helping us support a lot of that economic growth that we have going on in Wyoming and expand our access to renewable resources and facilitate a lot of the development of those renewable resources for our data centers. Next slide, please. We are on track for that transmission project to complete this year, which is very exciting because we need it to complete this year. And our first phase has been completed in 2024, and by the end of 2025, we plan for it to be completed. Next slide. This is more informational if anyone needs to reach out to any of our implementation team. This is our listed here as our program managers and our strategic partners. We are utilizing Utilicast, Artigen, Odie, OSI, and MediaLogic. We are hiring 14 new employees to support both Balancing Authority and the EIM implementation. BA supervisor who has already been hired. We've hired 4 of our 6 BA operators. We have 2 new Balancing Authority training and compliance analysts, a new transmission engineer. We have also hired our Oasis and Transmission Services supervisor. So now we just need to hire a VER forecast analyst and 2 settlement analysts. So please send them our way if you know anyone really qualified. Thank you. Next slide. You know, like we said at the beginning, and we've heard over and over, we got a lot going on. So just highlights here of all the different tracks we have going on, clients and training, our FERC filings, the CAISO EIM implementation, establishing our Balancing Authority, and our Ready Wyoming transmission project. We are on time for all of those, which is quite amazing. We have a lot of work ahead of us. So, guys. Thank you so much. And next we have Dwayne Howard, the Vice President of Energy Services and Technology from BHE Montana.
Thank you all. We'll start with a little company overview of our EIM implementation. Testing. I think it was on. It wasn't. Thank you. EIM implementation overview. Then we'll talk about 3 issues we've had thus far with our EIM implementation. And I'll preface that with these are issues internal to our company, not issues external to CAISO or anything else. And then we'll talk about our progress thus far in the EIM implementation. And so a high level overview of our company. The company was formed in 2006. At that time, the name was Nature Inner. We were acquired by Berkshire Hathaway Energy in 2022. The great thing about that is that they invested in us. Our previous owner had a set. And so our last project was built in 2012. And there was no growth of the company since then. Once we were acquired in 2022, within the first 6 months, we had already been flagged to mandated to grow, to expand, which included looking at the IM imbalance market, looking at new generation assets. And so currently our fleet is just our fleet is just Glacier Wind 1, Glacier Wind 2, and the Grimrock generation asset. Those are 3 WEC certified generation owner, generation operator entities. And we also have our BAs, 2 of them. One is the Power Watch and one is the Wind Watch. The reason we had 2 of them is because we're interconnected kind of uniquely. So we have Glacier Wind 1, which is interconnected to Northwestern Energy. Glacier Wind 2 ties into WAPA. And then Grimrock is interconnected to the Montana-Alberta tie line, which is currently in Northwestern's Balancing Authority. And so because of that, to optimize the assets in real time, being at the wind variable energy, it was preferable for us to have Balancing Authority so we could optimize each role. We have a WEC certified 24/7 control center. That's been in operation since 2015. Prior to that, it was more of a scheduling. We contracted out our BA services. We pulled the BA services in-house in 2015. That is actually located in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. So although our name is BHE Montana, we were mandated to grow in Montana, so our name is that. But you know, our office is in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Another good thing about the growth is that we're opening a new office there in Great Falls, Montana. So we're adding new assets, as mentioned at the bottom, Glacier battery system, 75 megawatts by 2 hours. It's a Tesla battery. Glacier Solar Park is going to be 120 megawatts of solar. And the new office there in Great Falls as well. So all that's in Montana. All the growth that's being invested there in Montana as well. And as a side note, it's not on the slides. Prior to our acquisition, we were looking showcast to see if we could actually join EIM before. But being that we were wind only, generation only balancing authority that was wind only, we had no way of passing the sufficiency grant system. So we had looked at EIM prior to the acquisition. We realized without the investment from our owner who would invest in us to get those dispatchable assets, we couldn't do it. With the acquisition, we were happy that they invested in us, that we could move forward with EIM. Next slide. So just a high level of our implementation. We did receive FERC approval for the signed EIM implementation agreement in May of 2024. Also, we have our balancing authority consolidation. So as mentioned, we have 2 balancing authorities. Currently, Northwestern Balancing Authority, and it's kind of on the next slide, but I'll just describe it and we'll look at it. Northwestern Balancing Authority includes the Montana-Alberta tie line, which goes up to Alberta, and it also includes Montana, northwest side of Montana. With EIM having the one dispatchable asset, the battery, we thought it would be best, and it would be best to consolidate the 2 balancing authorities into one. So our Wind Watch Balancing Authority is going to be retired. Our Power Watch Balancing Authority is going to maintain and just expand the footprint. All of our generation assets will be in the one Power Watch Balancing Authority. Once that's done, that's going to be November of 2025. The next step is December of 2025, where we start our market simulation. So we have, like you all, you have 1 month of going live with your BA. We'll have 1 month of our consolidated BA being live. And then we do our market simulation starting December 2025. Then we'll do our parallel operations February of 2026. To support this, we have hired our system, we call them system operators with our EIM analysts. We have 5 of those that will be working on DuPont modified schedule. We also have the settlements analysts who will be supporting our settlements and our back office support as well. But they're already hired, but we'll be going live then in May 2026 on first production trade day. Next slide. I think one slide is missing. There should be one slide before overview. That's okay. That's not a problem. The slide that it would have shown you that I should have shown it. I know. Is that okay? Yep. Can we go to the next slide real quick? Okay, perfect. So there's an overview of how we currently sit. In red is the Montana-Alberta tie line that goes from Alberta down south to Montana. At the bottom where you see Great Falls, that's actually the substation owned by Northwestern Energy. So the Great Falls substation is there. Battle starts there and goes northward over the border. Currently, the U.S. portion of Battle is in the Northwestern Balancing Authority. The portion across the border, north of Battle, is in Canada, and that's in the Alberta Electric System Operators VA. So Mattle spans currently 2 balancing authorities. So the right of Mattle, where this is Hay Lake, is where our Rimrock generation assets are. And then down where Marias is where our Glacier Wind 2 is going to interconnect as well. So the idea is that our generation assets are adjacent to the U.S. portion of Mattle. We're going to, as part of our entry into EIM, have transmission that we're going to be donating into EIM as well. So now we can go to the previous slide, please. That's when they give a high level of what we're doing. One issue we had was, as a generation only BA, we had transmission rights, so we could sell our generation, but we didn't have the transmission in our BA. In addition to talking to Mattle regarding being in our BA, they're owned also by Berkshire Hathaway Energy, which made it an easy conversation where we can partner together, and together we can join EIM. They happily agreed to it. So in addition to donating the transmission, we're also enlarging the footprint of our balancing authority. We have 300 megawatts of transmission rights on Mattle. In addition, the unused transmission is going to be donated as part of our EIM implementation. The expanded footprint, as mentioned here, is to support the donation of the transmission into EIM. Now, one item that's of note is that apparently all of our assets, our Rimrock assets, although interconnects to Matto, that's Northwestern's BA. Our Glacier asset interconnects to Northwestern as well. Our Glacier 2 interconnects to WAPA. As part of this integration, we're taking away our interconnection to WAPA and tying Glacier 2 into Northwestern. Which will leave us with Northwestern as our parent only adjacent BA. With this plan, we'd be taking Northwestern, pushing them down to the Great Falls substation, coming in between them and the Alberta Electric System Operator. So we currently do have a coordinated operating agreement that includes the Alberta Electric System Operator, Matto, and Northwestern. So now we're working and coordinating with them to be sandwiched in between basically the BAs. The conversations were a little slow going, to be honest, but thankfully we reached out to the CAISO, and they supported us with some stakeholder engagement. We had a meeting with the Alberta Electric System Operator, and after that, they've been much more responsive. So things are moving forward in regards to updating the COA. We've got some red lines now that we're getting back to them. So thanks to the team's support, we were able to get this conversation moving because so the Alberta Electric System Operator, they really didn't know who we were. Northwestern was very familiar with us, but they were like, who's this little entity that's going to try to squeeze in between, wants to be on Matto. So it didn't really go anywhere, but thankfully we had the support of the CAISO. So now those conversations are moving. Next, 2 slides. Perfect. This is just a high level overview. So currently we have the north side of Matto, which is in Canada. That's in the Alberta Electric System Operators VA. In red, that highlight is what's in Northwestern's VA with Matto, Hay Lake, Matto, Parias. Then you have to the right our Wind Watch Balancing Authority, and then down is in green is the Power Watch. So instead of having 4 balancing authorities, the ASO, Northwestern, Power Watch, and Wind Watch, the proposal is to now have us established in between on the right. So ASO's to the north, Northwestern to the south, and a nice clean BA in between. So that's what we proposed and moving forward with that option. Next slide. Another issue was the full network model submittal. As mentioned, our BA and our operations hasn't grown since 2012. As such, our engineers who would yearly look at the full network model, ensuring that everything was in place, there was no need to change anything. We had no transmission, and there was no expansion for that. No new generation assets. It stayed the same. So every year it was simply a checkbox of it's the same full network model being submitted. Now with all these updates, not just the balancing authority consolidation, but the new generation assets, we had to submit and modify our new full network model. So that was one lift where we had to get our engineers trained by GE, who supplies our energy management system, get them trained and work with CAISO to make sure that what we were submitting met their requirements. So again, the CAISO was very supportive. We had multiple meetings with them. They provided great feedback, so we were able to submit that on time as well. Next slide. Item number 3, Matto tariff. So currently the Montana Alberta tie line has no load. Also our BAs have no load. In addition, although Northwestern is in EIM, I'm hoping they say, and although they're in EIM, their tariffs have all these schedules. The Montana Alberta tie line, they are not in the EIM BA. I never knew this until we started this process. So for EIM, Northwestern's BA stops at the Great Falls substation. They provide BA services except for EIM to Matto. And so including Matto in our BA and being in EIM would result in all of these tariff updates being required for Matto. And so working with their stakeholders and their existing customers and explaining what was going to be changing. Again, Utility-Gas was key on helping us with our proposals, our stakeholder engagement, CAISO as well. These are just the items that were an issue just because we didn't know about it until we knew about it. But now we're moving forward and things are going well. Again, we've worked with Northwestern, and so being in the north, where our location is Northwest Montana, which means our only adjacent BA and EIM would be Northwest Energy. So we're working with them regarding the energy transfers. And that's another reason why we hope they stay in EIM. Because those energy transfers we would want to get from them or need to get from them, then we'd be islanded, which is not ideal or desirable. But thus far, they've been helping us and supporting the implementation as well. Next slide. This is just a high level of our timeline on the Matto tariff file with FERC. It's proposed to be the end of July. Phase one of our balancing authority consolidation is to be end of September, October timeframe. And then the balancing authority going live with settlements with shadow operations and then parallel operations. And lastly, going live with EIM on May of 2026. The next slide. Expected impacts and outcomes. As mentioned, there was a number of stakeholders involved in this. Matto customers. Currently, Matto does not do financial settlements. They have to tag their law. They don't do financial settlements either, but they don't do financial losses. So they have to tag their energy losses on that they schedule on Matto, which is one reason why they were not part of EIM in Northwestern VA. So Matto customers would have a simplified process. This would eliminate the need for them to schedule transmission losses. They would settle losses financially. For our BA Power Watch, it would improve the reliable operation of our BA, especially having wind only and soon to be wind, solar only, and battery. The idea is that when the generation is available, the market needs it to be able to distribute it to those customers who need it. Being islanded in a BA that's far from the market, you're not able to optimize your assets. So the idea, the desire for joining EIM was to optimize the renewable assets as much as possible to ensure that it was available to the market. For Northwestern Energy, it would simplify their transmission operations because they will be removing Matto from their operations. So currently, they're tasked with overseeing Matto. They're tasked with overseeing their scheduled losses. So it makes it so Northwestern Energy has been very supportive. They've been a key positive influence as we've been moving forward as well. And then for the Alberta Electric System Operator, again, we had a stakeholder meeting with them. We mentioned to them how this would bring EIM to their border. It would allow also Western Power Pool, because we're a member of Western Power Pool. It will bring the Western Power Pool to the border of ASO as well. Now, ASO is a member of the Western Power Pool. However, historically, before Matto was owned by BHE, Matto was asked about providing transfers to Western Power Pool against Alberta. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to participate in the previous owner. Now that they're owned by BHE, and now that we're going to have them in our BA, we're 100% supportive of if the Western Power Pool wanted a separate way of transfers. Apparently, at one path through BPA to ASO. They want to utilize Matto in real time as well for another path for transfers. We'd 100% support that. So two positives for the ASO is that if they did really show interest in EIM, it'd be right at their border. And for Western Power Pool, it potentially opens up a second path for transfers. And so to us, it's a win-win situation. So we're just thankful for everyone's support. Again, our contractors, the vendors, CAISO, everyone's been very supportive of BHE.
Okay, thank you both. I don't know that we have any time for questions. Probably not. No. All right. Well, a big round of applause for our new. And change for the next game.
All right. People here. Yes. It will be really exciting if we can get to a RIF meeting without my microphone malfunctioning.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming today.
Lindsay and I are going to do a brief update on the RIF enhancements project that we started earlier this year. And if we can go to the next slide, please. We're planning on focusing today on recapping some of what we had seen in the stakeholder comments that were submitted in early May. And going over some of the common themes that we noticed from the input that we got from a fairly wide range of stakeholders representing different segments of the Western energy markets. And so we're going to focus mostly on summarizing that input. We have a little bit of background information to just tee up the topics that were addressed in comments, but I think in light of the discussion we had in April, we're planning on spending the bulk of our time on summarizing that stakeholder input and then talking about next steps. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So just to briefly recap where we are, and what the RIF is doing. We started this project earlier this year following the publication of the Pathways Initiative Step 2 final proposal. And the purpose of the RIF enhancements project is really to evaluate if there are any elements of the stakeholder process changes in the Pathways Step 2 final proposal that would be beneficial for stakeholders to implement and consider now as part of the RIF. We're also hoping to support the Pathways transition if that comes to pass, as it does. Recognizing that legislation is needed as part of the triggers for Pathways implementation, we wanted to proactively plan for some of those changes so that we would be, as a stakeholder community, be ready for when that transition occurs. If we can go to the next slide. So the RIF enhancements project is really looking at three things. It's looking at a way for the regional issues forum to transition into the stakeholder representatives committee under the Pathways framework. It's to prepare for sector transitions. We talked in April about how the current sectors of the RIF are composed differently. The sectors of the stakeholder representatives committee will be under Pathways. And so we wanted to focus on ways to facilitate that transition in a way that makes sense given the organization of the RIF now. And then again, looking at opportunities for improvements in the stakeholder process and ways that the RIF may expand its role in a way that would be beneficial for the stakeholder community. Next slide, please. So in terms of timing, we published our paper obviously in April at a comment period. The RIF liaisons have been focused on reviewing and analyzing the input that we got, and we'll talk more about that. And in the third quarter, we'll be looking at the next iteration of our paper and how to integrate the input and feedback we received into a finalized proposal. Next slide, please. And next slide. So in terms of general feedback, my interpretation of the comments is that stakeholders are generally supportive of this effort. We heard that there are broad benefits to facilitating this transition, but at the same time, there are a number of issues to be considered, including how to consider this effort in light of any legislative activities that happen later this year, ways in which the RIF should coordinate with the ISO as it undertakes its own stakeholder process improvements, workload considerations, both on the part of the stakeholder community and on the part of the RIF liaisons. Timing, there were various perspectives on the timing of this transition, including comments that suggested that different pieces of the RIF enhancements proposal should proceed according to different timing depending on whether they are core elements of the pathways step 2 final proposal or could be implemented independently. And then finally, there was some interest in the stakeholder community around having a process to reevaluate sectors periodically. Next slide, please. Turning to the specific issues in the RIF enhancements paper, the first topic that we covered was the SRC transition approach and process. And under the discussion paper, what we had proposed was that the RIF would actually develop and implement a process to transition into the stakeholder representatives committee, the SRC, but that formal transition wouldn't occur until the actual triggers for implementation of the regional organization under the step 2 proposal are satisfied. Next slide, please. So in terms of stakeholder feedback on this particular topic, we observed general support for transitioning the RIF into the SRC. But again, in keeping with some of the common themes that I just touched on, there was a desire on the part of stakeholders for more detail about what this transition would look like. And different stakeholders offer different views on the timing for this transition, with some stakeholders expressing a need to calibrate the transition process to California legislative efforts. Other stakeholders were supportive of more immediate action. In terms of elements that the RIF liaisons will be focused on as we look to put together the next proposal, given that there's consensus for moving forward with transitioning the RIF into the SRC, I think we're going to be talking about what exactly that process looks like, what the steps will be, and what the necessary triggers are for different elements of the transition. There will obviously need to be a discussion about timeline, a contingency plan in the event that legislation does not advance in the way that would enable formal movement to the SRC, and then finally workload issues. Next slide, please. Turning to the next topic in the discussion paper, as we talked about in April, the sectors of the RIF are different from the sectors in the pathway step 2 final proposal. This is a screen clip of the sector composition under pathways. And there are differences both in terms of the number of seats that are included in the SRC, and the sectors themselves are different in that there are a couple of new sectors that the RIF doesn't have, and there will be some market participants who will be moving sectors. Next slide, please. So the discussion paper included some high-level concepts for ways that the RIF could implement a sector transition. And one timing consideration that we talked about during our last meeting is an interest in helping to organize and formulate the new sectors in a way that could support regional organization nominating committee efforts. So there is a period in which we may want to be thinking about composing the sectors differently in order to support the nominating committee process, while also continuing the work of the RIF based on the way in which sectors are presently defined in the charter. So we, in short, thought about establishing the new sectors and creating some adjacencies to the RIF, whereby those new sectors would have one liaison that would sort of function in coordination with the regional issues forum. We also talked about tightening up how we track membership in the different sectors. Right now we have informal email lists, but there isn't really any kind of formal sector roster organizations. Next slide, please. So we serve general support for this concept, but there is a desire on the part of stakeholders for more detail about what this transition would look like. And for obviously, again, considering contingencies in the event
the triggers for regional organization formation are established. There was a number of views, or a range of views, I should say, among stakeholders regarding timing of when the sector transition process should start. Some commenters were supportive of making this happen in order to support the nominating committee activities for the regional organization board. Others were more concerned about, or were more focused on, an incremental approach that would be less rushed. The liaison team will be looking at, obviously, those timeline considerations, contingencies, and whether there should be a periodic review of sectors on a going forward basis. That isn't something that I think the RIF has done since the sectors were initially formulated. I may be wrong about that, but a more practiced effort to reevaluate the sector composition might help the RIF keep pace with changes in the industry and broader changes in the composition of market participation. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Lindsay.
Okay, thank you. So the next part of the paper really spoke to the identification and prioritization, specifically with the catalog and roadmap process within CAISO and the roundtable discussion. The paper proposed a more active role in the roadmap prioritization and the potential of like indicative voting on the catalog and roadmap. We can go ahead and go on to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of the comments that we received back on the paper, there were areas of agreement where there was a satisfaction with the current role and an emphasis on collaboration and inputs, and just the coordination that the RIF is currently undertaking. There were the areas of disagreement were under the scope and the process, the resource and capacity concerns, timing and priority concern with indicative voting, and process questions regarding voting. And so with this division in comments, we wanted to at least consider, or will be considering, the following questions when going through our next iteration. And that really is how can the RIF take on an expanded role, and really what's the volume of the project management, coordination, internal assessment needs, and really considering this with really everything that we're currently undertaking and what's realistic for the RIF to take on at this time. Additionally, we want to ask ourselves, at what level should voting occur, since there was no clear consensus on whether voting should be an individual stakeholder level or sector level, or really both. Where should the voting occur for the roadmap and catalog process? And then additionally, how would interim voting processes relate to the eventual SRC procedures? So we can move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Stakeholder initiative phase. So we need to go back one slide, please. Sorry, I didn't think you forgot to miss. Okay, that's good. So in this section of the paper, the idea was really around sector sponsors within the stakeholder process, and kind of propose this idea of multiple stakeholders, if they're expressed interest, to kind of be a sponsor within a stakeholder initiative or a working group, and not necessarily be a technical expert, but really be kind of a facilitator of the discussion and conversation moving forward. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, in terms of the sector sponsor role, in comments, there was general support for the sector sponsor role, but it was not unanimous. The role requires transparency and the time consuming nature of the role also needs to be considered. And then also it was mentioned that the role should not be used for gatekeeping. The areas of disagreement were about how and when the RIF SRC should start this role, and whether the role contains flexibility for sponsors to use expertise or influence to shape the initiative. So some of the questions that we will ask ourselves for the RIF is, how can the RIF ensure the workload on sponsors is appropriate? How clearly does the RIF need to define the role of the sponsor to ensure it meets the goals of pathway step 2? And when and how will the sponsor role be effectuated? Okay, next slide, please. So the implementation of and reporting on indicative voting. So in the RIF paper, there was a proposal to resume the use of indicative voting through the positions statements by stakeholders during the comment periods. And kind of a request of CAISO to implement indicative voting. Okay, so, and also represents the incremental step forward of more comprehensive indicative voting. So reintroducing the concept of voting to stakeholders and which would provide more insight to the RIF liaisons of specifically where stakeholders stood on specific positions. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. I'm sorry. Okay, can we go back one more slide? There we go. Thank you. So the areas of agreement, there was general support for indicative voting in some form. There was support for public transparency around voting and a general agreement around entity level voting, not sector voting by RIF liaisons, but positions were not unanimous. Again, there was an importance of maintaining the comment process alongside the voting so that stakeholders could articulate positions more clearly, other than just providing a specific vote. And also there was a preference for more nuanced voting options, not just to support neutral or opposed, but also a support with caveats and oppose with caveats, something that could provide additional detail and with their vote. The areas of disagreement were at what stages voting is appropriate and whether voting should be limited to certain groups, i.e. should it just be limited to CAISO participants, or how should the voting occur within the stakeholder process. So the key questions being discussed by the RIF liaisons were, at what stages should the RIF recommend voting, or should it recommend it at specific stages in the stakeholder process? And what voting alternatives should be suggested to CAISO? Should it just be support, oppose, or neutral, or should we provide more options or propose to provide more options to stakeholders? And then lastly, should voting be limited to certain groups? That's an additional question we will cover. Okay, move on to the next slide. Function and purpose of the RIF. So the RIF may engage in increased reporting on pending decisional items from the stakeholder initiatives and supplemented by indicative voting if adopted. So this is really just how the RIF will expand its role in the future processes moving forward with this pathways framework. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So the comments that we received in this area of the paper, there were areas of agreement that the RIF should continue to identify areas of common interest across sectors. A cultural change is required to support a larger advocacy role for the RIF. And it was noted in several commenters that it should be important for the RIF to not lose its educational role, that is an important feature that we do today. The areas of disagreement were whether the RIF should serve an advisory role regarding stakeholder positions, whether the RIF should transition the role to another group or retain the educational component. And there were some disagreement on what type of educational material is really most helpful to stakeholders. So the key questions that we will ask ourselves for this next round is, would a more formalized process for how RIF positions are developed, would a more formalized process for how RIF positions are developed across stakeholder concerns about a RIF advisory role? Should the RIF serve as an advisory role or take on an advocacy role? And we need to clarify exactly what it is that we would be undertaking. If the RIF is not developing positions, can it still serve as a forum to enhance problem definition and policy development? And how does it do so without creating a parallel discussion to active initiatives? And then lastly, should the RIF develop clear parameters for the type of educational topics it addresses? So that wraps up the stakeholder feedback that we received on our initial paper. We can go ahead and advance it to the next slide, but we were going to open it up to questions from the group. And I don't know if there's any questions online, so please let me know.
This time I'm not seeing any hands up or questions in the WebEx chat.
Okay, thank you.
Bob Hendrick, Resources. We had raised an issue in our comment. And if it wasn't addressed here, when and how might we be able to address that?
So I think the comment had to do with the changes in the composition of the sectors and where potentially DWR specifically may fit under the pathways framework. And it's a good question. It made us think for a second. I think for a situation like this, where there's uncertainty about where you fit because you're a unique organization, I think what would make sense is for there to be a discussion with the current liaisons. I believe DWR is in the consumer and utility sector at the moment, or participates in that sector. You're on the email list for the sector. I can tell you that. But I think that because sectors are self-organizing under both the Regional Issues Forum framework and the Pathways framework, I think that it would be a good idea to talk with your liaisons and start there about where you align. It's not really for, I think, the liaisons to dictate that type of decision, but we want to cast as wide a net as possible for entities to participate fully in a sector that they think provides a good fit for them and can serve as a good forum for advancing interests. So I would start with a liaison level discussion, and I'm sure this will not be, as we look at sector changes, this isn't going to be the first or time that there is a question about fit and alignment. So thank you.
I might just make a comment on sector sponsors because it's something near and dear to my heart. And I also can point the blame at myself for exactly why I think this is important. So I think with one of the challenges with CAISO's kind of staff-led stakeholder process is that it enables market participants to kind of raise their hand and say, we really, 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 really want this to be fixed, and then not show up. And not drive it forward. And so, and like PGE is actually guilty of this. We asked for the greenhouse gas for non-pricing stakeholder initiative. CAISO promptly was responsive to us and started that. And then our GHG person went on parental leave and then took a new job. And so we left for Anya all by herself for like 6 months. And so I think what, like, my lesson from this is, especially when, there's something like, especially like this would under pathways count as a, compliance with a state law issue, which would be a high priority and like kind of push the ISO to stakeholder this. I think the sponsorship piece really pushes, those entities or those sectors who are really wanting this to stay engaged and to be genuinely active in the driving of that initiative. I think that concern around gatekeeping is a serious one, and I think thinking about that and how to ensure that this role doesn't become a gatekeeper is a important part of the thinking. But I do think, and we are not the only ones guilty of asking for something and then abandoning it. I've seen this, like, pretty frequently, actually, in the process. And I really hope that this change creates that ownership and that balance between a stakeholder-driven stakeholder process where the stakeholders are the ones writing materials and drafting and voting and being the only ones really driving something forward, compared to the KaiSO process that I personally love because I don't have enough staff to do stakeholder-driven process, but make sure that the ownership and connectivity to that ownership remains as part of the initiative.
Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. So move on. Okay. Okay, sounds good. We will move on to the next slide, which is our next steps. And I will say, the summaries that we provided today in the slides, they're really high-level summaries where we try to really identify areas of agreements and disagreements amongst stakeholders and in each of the different sections within our paper. We will definitely, or we are we are currently going through all of the stakeholder comments still and really digesting them, and we'll make sure that we, have an informed response back with our next paper. So in terms of next steps, we are going to prepare our next proposal, and we're really targeting a date of somewhere in third quarter of 2025. Sorry, it's not more specific. But we really wanted to take some time to really carefully consider all of the comments that came through, because some of them have very nuanced, but very, very good things to consider within the comments. So we will definitely take all of that back. If there's any questions, or if you wanted to make specific points about your comments that you maybe didn't think was well received here, please reach out to your sector liaisons, and we've provided the list of how you can find them if in case anybody didn't know where they could find their specific sector liaison. And then next slide. Next slide. Oh, yeah, there we go. Thank you. We also wanted to indicate where you can find the discussion paper and comments in case anybody was curious where this is located. We have a screenshot here of exactly how you can find all of the comments. So it's right there in case anybody is interested. All right, I think that's it. So do we have a break, or moving to the next panel? Right to the next panel. Okay, sounds good. Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vijay Singh, representing the EDAM sector. First off, thanks everyone for being here in person and on the WebEx. We have another great turnout in here today, which I appreciate. So as the RIF was determining our agenda for today, we discussed that we've heard a number of different EDAM implementation updates from various entities. But we thought we just hadn't really heard much about the day-ahead market enhancements in a few months, or could be more than a few months. So we have Heather Kelly, who's the Executive Director of Project Management Office at the California ISO, to give us an update. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you. Last one, everybody. Okay, next slide. And next slide. Yeah, so we do often give a lot of updates on EDAM implementation. But in order for EDAM to work, first we have to do the day-ahead market enhancements. And so we are doing these two projects in parallel. But the day-ahead market enhancements is a little bit further ahead than EDAM from our internal timeline perspective. Next slide. So this is a very detailed timeline. I'm not going to go through it, but what it demonstrates is from the very beginning of the policy development, which is in 2022, all the way through to go live in 2026, all of the different activities that have to happen so that day-ahead market enhancements can go live. Next slide. So one of the things that the ISO committed to for day-ahead market enhancements was to collaborating with market participants on configurable parameters within the day-ahead market. We made this commitment when we were doing our policy and getting board approval. And we actually started to get a lot of questions about it last year. So we had our first stakeholder meeting last year. And we went through what the configurable parameters were, how we were going to test them, how we were going to deliver results, when we could test them, and what market participation would look like. We presented that to over a stakeholder conference call, and we asked for feedback. Next slide. So a lot of the feedback from our original proposal was to extend the testing. So in order for us to do accurate testing, we have to have all of the software developed, we have to have it in an environment, and we have to have data in that environment for market participants. And so we had started a little bit later to make sure that we had some quality data for testing, but we listened to the feedback and we started it. We're going to start it earlier than originally proposed, and then we're also going to add a lot more working group sessions with market participants. We're going to kick off in August 2025, and we're going to have monthly working sessions starting in October, which is 1 month after the start of market simulation, so that we have time to build up the data needed to test the parameters. There's more detailed timeline. Next slide. Recently, in May, we finished connectivity testing. This was both for DAME and EDAM, so it was a 1 month long time frame where market participants participating in the simulation could connect to ISO systems, make sure they had the right permissions, the right technical certificates, and make sure that they can connect and start integration testing, which started on June 2nd. So integration testing goes for 3 months, and the purpose of that is for stakeholders to connect to our system, make sure they can submit data, make sure they can receive data, and run through the market runs with us on a daily basis. There's some links in here to our release page. On our release page, we have all of our stakeholder meetings around market
simulation and integration testing. We record them. We also put up the slides, if you're interested or your teams are interested. Next slide. The other thing that is happening right now is our big business practice manual updates. So the big business practice manuals are the processes and procedures on how to interact with the ISO and our tariff requirements. So the impacted BPMs are market instruments, market operations, and reliability requirements. We published a business practice summary last year to give everybody a very long lead to tell them what business practice manuals will be changing and what change, sort of a high level overview of what those changes would be. We're in the process of updating them right now, and we are going to publish a draft on July 1st, which is earlier than our normal process, but this is a big change, as is EM, and we want to give people plenty of time to review it. Next slide. We have a lot of training scheduled. Our first training is in August 2025. We have settlements training also in August of 2025. We have refresher training in April 2026. So we did our initial training in August 2025. A lot of times what we notice is people bring on additional staff between the initial training and the when we're right about to go live. So you're giving a refresher training in April 2026. Next slide. That's all I have. Any questions?
For the training scheduled to begin in August, is if referenced EDAM scheduling coordinators, does that also include intertie scheduling coordinators?
Yeah. So yeah.
Thanks. And maybe just to stick on the refresher training also, is that open to all scheduling coordinators as well?
Yeah, it'll be the same training again.
Okay.
And we'll make, if something came up in testing and we have to make a slight change to the training, that'll give us that opportunity to do so.
Great, thank you.
I'm gonna ask a question, maybe this was not the right place.
Go for it.
But I ask questions, so it doesn't matter. The recently in the RA proceeding at CPUC, there's been a lot of sort of back and forth about the new products. And I was just wondering if anybody would pick up the phone and sort of talk to the CPUC, making sure that they understand what the IR product is supposed to do and what the RC product is supposed to do, so that there's an appropriate differentiation in treatment of revenues.
I think I'm gonna phone a friend, a fellow ISO friend. Anybody knows the answer? Okay.
Yeah, so even when we were designing, several discussions around that. So you start to go live, and we have more information, we can certainly go back and have those discussions, but I think they had a very good understanding. I wouldn't say that they agreed with all the parameters, and they had some concerns about the demand curve and stuff like that, but I think they understood what the role of the product was, the magnitude of the product. We can go back and validate that their understanding is consistent with what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Does that answer? Or?
Yeah, that'd be good.
You hearing
it sort of love IR and
oh, I see. Yeah. So
like no,
the bigger focus was on the IR. The C was probably
yeah, you want he is now revenues from RP should be going down to the.
and I think we have a better way of now describing what is the potential leftover for the receive versus the imbalance reserve, and I think we formulated that. We probably should go back and have that discussion so they understand.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah.
need to rush. Heather, for existing scheduling coordinators and market participants, did anything come up in your connectivity testing that they should be aware of, or any major concerns? Because I kind of look at it as if you're already participating in ISO's markets from a connectivity standpoint.
It's not very much of.
I just wanted to check to see if there was anything, big issues that we're seeing. So the biggest issue will more be about products that are offered in there. Bidding, is that any issue or concern in terms of being sure if you're a scheduling coordinator or participant that you know the products you'll be bidding on, what's going away, what's coming in? Is that kind of the key thing that you would recommend?
Yeah, and that'll all become more important within the market simulation itself. Right now, we're just making sure the technology works so that we can get that out of the way, so that we can really practice participation in the market simulation.
And from a timing standpoint, I know you had training starting in August, and those market sims will be at the same time.
Market simulation starts September 2nd.
September 2nd. Okay.
Okay, seeing no more questions in the room. Event host, do we have any questions online?
Not seeing any questions online. Just as a quick reminder, you can raise your hand in the participants channel, or you can send your written question through the chat. But at this time, we have no questions.
One more in the room.
And that we all agree with James Lynn that there'll be the EDAM CRA testing and markets and operations.
The congestion revenue, yes, we're targeting that, yes.
Thanks.
I'm trying.
Okay, seeing no more questions, Heather, thank you for being here for the update. I will pass it on to Alan to close up.
All right, it is time to close out. Thank you. I want to extend a few thank yous to all of our panelists who joined us. You make these events valuable and informative, and we really appreciate your time to participate and to be here. It was great to see so many people in person. Appreciate the members of the Regional Issues Forum, the liaisons who put this together and strive to provide informative and educational events for the stakeholder community, and to recognize the members of the WEM governing body and the CAISO Board of Governors who made time to be here today. So thank you all. I hope everyone enjoyed and learned a lot today. There are a few items like we talked about, a few topics where there will definitely be some follow-up coming from the RIF, the market scenes conversation, and certainly the RIF enhancements. Look for more coming on that. And if you have any feedback on the meeting, the content, suggestions for future topics, please feel free to reach out to your RIF liaison at any time. The list of you, if you don't know who your liaison is, the list is on the Regional Issues Forum website. So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up this meeting. There is to be a reception out by the elevators. The food might not be ready yet, but the drinks are certainly ready. So you're welcome to go out and get started. Thank you. Have a good evening.